I wanted to thank you for taking the time to meet with a small business owner and answer some questions that I myself and some of my clients who are moms and also part of this community, of course, that they had.
Great.
So thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy campaigning, and so in case I forget to thank you at the end, I want to thank you at the beginning.
Thanks, Liyah.
So first question, tell us about Brad Little and the roots you have here in Idaho.
Well, our family, both sides of my family, both on my mother's side and my father's side, have been here for a long, long time in the livestock business. And on my wife's side, they were originally grain farmers up in the Palouse area around Genesee. We've been in Idaho for a long time. My paternal grandfather came in 1892, and he was the last of my kids' grandfathers to come to Idaho. He came from Scotland, and he went to Emmett, where we live.
What have you done to improve economic development in the Magic Valley?
Well, this is a great place for me to come because we've done a lot of work down here. We're a service center for the local community, whether it's the mayor, the county commissioners, the economic development people, whoever is in charge of economic development. They all have my cell number, and if they need me to talk to a company, I get right down here and talk to them. Obviously, one of the ones that I probably spent the most time with was Chobani, because they originally weren't even looking at Twin Falls. They were looking at Glenns Ferry, Burley, and Jerome, and at that time it was a much, much smaller company than what it evolved to.
So we finished touring a little bit of our downtown Main Street construction, and so looking into the future, what do you think is the direction that the Magic Valley economically is going to go, and what role do you see yourself playing in that?
Obviously, adding value to the agricultural products that are here, whether it's sugar beets, grain, milk, cattle, any one of those, adding value to it, and adding a lot of value is what's important, so that we can keep those good jobs here that add value to those commodities. But then we need to continue to diversify the economy, which means you got to have a skilled workforce. But you got to have a skilled workforce in these modern food processing plants anyway. So I am all about diversifying the economy, because commodities go up and down, and as we can add more technology companies, more service companies, all of those add to the resiliency. If the commodity prices go down or there's disruption on the global stage, the more diversity you have, the more resilient the community would be. And just right out here, this new development that you're doing downtown is gonna be attractive to people that want to start a small technology company or a small manufacturing company right here.
You recently released a tax plan. How is that going to help me as a business owner and other small business owners?
Probably the one that jumps off the page at me of my tax plan that would have a big impact on you and your neighbors around here is lowering what you pay in unemployment tax. And that'll be $100 million over 3 years that businesses pay in there. We'll lower the rate. I'm certain that's going to happen. I just don't know when, because you've been paying too much tax into that, and we've collected enough money to where we've got a more than adequate nest egg when the economy goes down, to where we'll be prepared for it. The second thing is in your personal property tax. I've advocated for moving it from $100,000, so you don't have to inventory your personal property tax, up to $250,000, and then that would be it. And that will make it to where medium-sized businesses don't have to spend a lot of time inventorying their personal property. It would just be exempt, and I don't think it'll have a big impact on any counties. Obviously, if you were to expand, or one of your fellow businesses was going to expand, I would allow the counties the option, it's totally their option, to waive part of the personal property tax. Because today, if you were going to expand, they could waive part of your real property tax, but they can't waive your personal property tax. That's an option that's available. And then the big thing is, I want to lower the rate down, the nominal rate. I want to cut that rate by $350 million, but I want to put it out over a period of time to where we can continue to fulfill our commitments to education and not disrupt our investment in education.
What can we do to improve education in Idaho? We need to invest in our future. How are we going to raise our education standards? And I just finished my term on the school board, so I'm going to pay attention to your answer on this one, because I've heard it from every possible perspective and angle. But at the end of the day, I think that we still have a challenge in the state of Idaho with our education standards. So what can we do?
Well, I'm a fan of the governor's task force, and the reason I'm a fan of it is I like the components of it, but most importantly, I like the fact that the superintendents, the trustees, the teachers, the parents, the business community, the state legislature all collectively agreed on 20 things to do. Now, would I have done some things different? Yes, but it's so important in education policy that you have buy-in, given our fractured education system in Idaho. And I'm not against that, but it means it's more work to get people collectively. For a legislative committee or a governor to say, let's do this one thing, and not having buy-in from the districts and from the educators, you're in trouble. So we put in that program. We're working on our 4th year now. It takes a while to get the end product out of that. What we're doing on literacy to getting these kids read, proficiently at the end of the 3rd grade, which is our most important task, means that you've got to have more resources. You've got to have a better way to gauge their success, where we measure them when they come in, whether it's the first day of the 1st grade or kindergarten, and then what we do later going on, where we have reading coaches, where we have summer reading programs. Those are all components of that important part, which is getting kids reading proficiently at the end of the 3rd grade. After you get there, then there's all those other components of it, which range from math and science, technology in the classroom, and most importantly, what are we doing in the career ladder so we can recruit and retain the very, very best professionals. And when you do that, not only do you have to recruit them and retain them, you have to treat them like professionals so that they have pride and know that they're valued by not only the local community but by the state.
One of the common kind of narratives I hear, even with my generation and then post my generation too, is that if they're talented, they have to leave this area. There's just nothing for them here, and we refer to it as the brain drain. And that affects even not just the economy, but that affects, I think, community morale, but also our education system, because a lot of the teachers also move away. I know there's a teacher shortage throughout Idaho. What can we do, and what do you plan to do to draw that talent back, or rebrand either Idaho or rebrand the Magic Valley area so that we are a talent center and that there is a want to move back here, or post-graduation to stay here instead of move away?
Well, literally my one thing is every day is to wake up, what do we do to keep our kids here and to recruit those that have left back? That's education, infrastructure, regulation, tax policy. The number one thing is to allow our kids to stay and allow those that have left to come back. A lot of kids that left don't know is what modern manufacturing jobs, modern food processing jobs. We talked about Chobani a minute ago. There's 25 people out there in their R&D department that are doing research and development on new and sophisticated food products. Right over here, you've got the cheese research facility. We need our Idaho kids and the ones that have left to come back and to staff those companies. And then we need new companies that are coming up with new great ideas. I have advocated for a program to where the parents, the aunts and uncles, that they reach out to their kids and say, here's a common place to where you can find whatever kind of job, technology, manufacturing, production, service sector, law, the health field. Here's all the jobs that are available. If you want to come back to Twin Falls or Jerome or Burley or Filer, here's the opportunities that are here, because we've got way more jobs than we've got qualified workers here in Idaho.
Do we start with kindergarten? Do we have preschools? I know that that's one of the big conversations is funding preschools in Idaho or full day kindergarten.
I actually testified at both the House and Senate this year on what are we doing on pre-K. And I actually mimicked a lot of what you said. There's one solution probably doesn't work everywhere. Obviously, paying for full day kindergarten would be something that you could get to pretty fast because we're already doing kindergarten. But there's some of these communities where you have to have a robust pre-K period. And allowing them to use some state funds to do that rather than mandating it. There's two programs in the state that have been really active, and that's Caldwell and Basin School District up at Idaho City. And their programs have been pretty successful. There was a program that used to exist that I was pretty fond of, which was Parents as Teachers, where you went out and helped parents, that maybe haven't been exposed to and don't have that social net where they ask their parents or neighbors or a faith-based group or whatever it is about being parent. You help them to be better parents. There's all these options, this kind of smorgasbord of options getting these kids prepared for the first day of the first grade. That's why we had all the hearings last year to talk about it. I think there might be a proposal to go to full day kindergarten, and I want a collective agreement on that that's the thing to do. The states I've spent quite a bit of time talking to the states that have gone to pre-K. Some of them, they've worked pretty good. Some of them they're still having some problems with. And again, I want to use let's steal a good idea from the states that are working, the Mississippi model, the Oklahoma model, in those areas where they put pre-K in and learn from them about what's worked. One of the things in some of these school districts, they don't have money to pay for the busing to get to the kids to kindergarten, and perhaps just put money into busing so we can get them there and get them back.
How do we address changing or shifting the culture in Idaho that perceives education to be of a higher value?
We as leaders, as business, as political leaders, as community leaders, need to convince those kids in those lower grades that what was adequate 10 years ago was not adequate today. And I see that. There was, for a while, as farms consolidated, as mills consolidated, as food processing consolidated, and there still is, in some instances, bitterness out there, but we need to convince them that the solution is not to be bitter. The solution is to get the skills, and that's how you save these small communities and save Idaho, is today in Idaho, our major commodities, dairy, potatoes, beef, grain, we have the most modern plants for processing that of anywhere literally in the world. And we have to have a skilled workforce, and we have to get that out to these kids. And the career counselors, which are starting at the 7th and 8th grade in junior high and high school, are one of the venues we need to get to these kids and say, look, you may not like Algebra 1, and we'll try and make it a little funner for you, but here's why you have to learn Algebra 1. Because you can't program and you can't run the equipment in these modern plants. If you want to be able to feed your family and plan for retirement, here's making that connection. Make that connection between that educational aspiration and them being able to stay here in Idaho, feed their families, and plan for retirement.
What is your opinion on the STEM Action Center, and how have you worked with its director, Angela, and her team to raise awareness across the state of Idaho for STEM education?
I've been a big supporter of the STEM Action Center. We just are going to start a program next month that's going to be military-based. It's going to allow some kids funded through the Department of Defense, because that's one of the places where we need STEM graduates. But I view the STEM Action Center just like I do a lot of other things. Obviously, one of the ways to get kids interested in STEM are all the STEM jobs that exist at all these great agricultural companies, and what skills they need there, running their robots, running their modern manufacturing, doing lab research. It's different in different communities, and that STEM model should be adaptive to what those interests of those kids are in those local communities.
We have a pill opiate epidemic, and it's affecting quality of life, it's affecting the children, and it's also affecting production and productivity. We also have an increasing rise of grandparents that are now raising the grandkids because the parents are locked up or overdosed or away. What can we do to break down the shaming and the silence, and also address in a public health way, address addiction in our community? What can the state do to help communities address this opiate and heroin epidemic now that's pretty much spreading in our communities?
Well, the existing problem is hard to address because it's the fact that they got into particularly heroin and some of those other areas. That's a very expensive and comprehensive plan. We have our mental health facilities. We've got a new one. We just stood up here in the Magic Valley. We've got some others around the state. We've got our drug courts. We've got other programs to address those. But we need to extend that out, because to get a lot of these people clean, it takes a long period of time, whether it's through the pardons and parole system, whether it's through our drug courts, whether it's, the crisis centers are only for those really bad situations on the first day. But ideally, we need to get to the supply, and that's give people hope, give them a good job, give them a good education, and do all we can to encourage them to not take those first few steps to get through the door of that. We can't just keep giving people with a problem a pill or a treatment. We've got to go back further in the pipeline and start giving people hope. And some of that government can do, and some of it has to be done by the communities they're in.
Is there a role that government could play in either some type of data sharing or preventative programs, whether it's in the schools? The kids can teach us more about it, sadly, than we ourselves know, because they're exposed to it on a daily basis. Is there a program that we could have in Idaho that you think that other communities have adopted?
Well, there's and there's all kinds of tentacles to this problem. There's the gang activity, and I was quite involved in Emmett when I represented my home community about what do we do about, and actually we took a model that existed in Jerome, and what you have to do there is teach the mothers to look for those first signs of gang activity. If you can snuff that out early to where you don't get that gang started, that goes a long ways, and that really needs to be school-based and faith-based. There's some things government can do, but usually when government gets involved, it's when you've already created the problem. Mm-hmm. So the community, the schools, and the faith-based community needs to reach out and say, son or daughter, don't you affiliate with those people. That will slam the door on that aspect of it, which is some of the most insidious part of it when these gangs get involved, because then they protect themselves and there's a lot more violence. But just the flat opioid addiction, we've got to do a lot more through the school program. And there's some school programs that are working pretty good and some that aren't. What I would advocate for is the school districts that do have a good program is we take and highlight their programs and let the schools that are most like them adapt the model that they've got, because the further you get into a rural area or you come to, I wouldn't call Twin Falls urban, but it's more urban than Filer or Richfield. You've got to have a program that works for that local community.
If elected governor, what is your policy on health care in Idaho?
Well, actually, even before I'm elected governor, I've been real involved with the Department of Health and Welfare, with the Department of Insurance. We all thought, we were all led to believe that after the election, with a change in administration, with a change in Congress, that there was going to be this big solution. Well, this last week we found out that window of opportunity is gone, and Idaho needs to go back to what we had before, which was some of the most affordable insurance. We don't have that now, and we had a program before where we had a high risk pool, and we took people that had ailments that insurance companies were reluctant to take the risk on, and we put them over in another pool, and that dropped the cost of insurance for everybody else. We still took care of them over there in that pool. And in fact, that's one of the ways you get people to come back to Idaho, because if our kids are working, and I've got a very close connection with a person that had this exact problem. They were working for a major corporation, a big city. They got cancer. The cancer was kind of over. They wanted to come back to Idaho. They could not have gotten insurance, but they came back and we had our high-risk pool, and that was the way they could come back to Idaho. We need to re-implement that here, and that will lower the cost of health care and broaden the access and broaden the affordability. Because if you're working for a big employer, they kind of have some buying power, but what this insurance cost is doing is just killing the individuals and the small employers. And with this plan, we will get there. As far as the uncovered part, the state is about to ask for 2 waivers, which will take that block of whatever it is, 45 to 80,000 people, and we will cover the bulk of those by asking for these 2 waivers. And so I'm hopeful that the state has that resolved before inaugural day, because we don't have time to wait until a year from January.
And the waivers, that's through the federal government?
Right. And then we will cover them. If we get waivers, we'll have a way to where some of these high-risk people that couldn't get insurance can get insurance and get covered. I've always said, if you take all the money that industry and individuals are putting in, all the money the state's putting in, all the money the federal government's putting in, all of our incredible medical facilities and the insurance company, you aggregate that money and get it pointed in one direction, we'll get everybody covered.
As a native Idahoan and lifelong rancher, what is your thoughts on management of Idaho public lands?
Well, I've spent a lot of time on public lands and talking about the management of public lands, and I believe that we've kind of reached a tipping point. There was a time 3 or 4 years ago when we're going to sue the government and get the land back. I think that's not going to happen, in my opinion and the opinion of a lot of people. But what we can do is have more adaptive management, to where we can manage the forests where we don't have the fires, where collaboratively the community, the wildlife advocates, the ranching community, the timber community can get together and say, here's what we want the landscape to look like in the future. We want healthier trees. We want healthier range grounds. We want to recover the sage grouse and not disrupt economic activity. We have gone so far in just the last few years in these communities of resolving this issue. And then the conservation community has realized that the no action alternative, no grazing, no timber management, no whatever, is not what it takes to have a resilient forest or a resilient rangeland.
I told you a little bit about my background and my history, and that I came to the United States as a refugee. The word refugee has been in the mainstream conversation for over 2 years now. I think more people are aware of the resettlement programs, and as well as what the experience is like for someone that's integrating into their community. The Magic Valley relies heavily on refugees and immigration to support its business. What is your opinion about a path forward on immigration and refugees?
Well, I mean, we do it pretty right here in the Magic Valley, and the issue is the compassionate part of these people that have been, for the most part, dislocated by war, and we can do things in their countries that can alleviate part of that, but there's always going to be a pathway. I look at the Iraqis that are here in this community that were very supportive to the American military when they were over there. I don't believe anybody thinks that they should not have a pathway. Particularly, they think they're going to be in either Iran or Iraq, or going to have trouble if they stay home. That's the classic definition of a refugee in other instances. And of course, you have a big Congolese population here and the Congolese community has been, they have a terrible time over there, and they've been assimilated. The issue is assimilate them into the community, that they become part of the community, and I think that's taken place here. I obviously there's people, and I don't think the old administration, they were a little cavalier when Idahoans had asked them questions about, oh yeah, we vetted them, but we don't have much evidence. If we can get beyond that to where people have confidence that the refugee program has really been vetted, and that not any one segment of society has to bear too much of the weight of them when they come in, I think that will continue to be a part of our U.S. foreign policy, and Idaho in this community has been very welcoming.
So as a refugee, and then as someone who advocates and tries to really educate my community on the difference between assimilation and integration, which the end product's the same way, a productive, quality member of a society and culturally literate also. I have a new term I've adopted, and
Okay.
I'll gift it to you. You can
All right.
accept it if you'd like, or you can marinate it. So refugees, immigrants, those oftentimes look at the cause or the conflict, identifies a human with the cause or the conflict, which oftentimes when does that end? When is the refugee no longer a refugee? Citizenship, but there's this pending period. Same with immigrants who have to go through this application and pending period. So my new favorite term is New Americans. And I feel like that's so true to the American narrative, even from going back to when the Irish and the English were coming here, and the Vietnamese. And so New Americans is a term I'm going to gift to you. I've learned it recently, and if it's one that resonates, then
well, I like that. Obviously, all of my ancestors, they were financial refugees. They were leaving because they didn't have any opportunity, and it was incredibly important to my ancestors. And of course, when I want to go back to assimilation. Particularly some of the Northern European countries, that's where it's a real problem, because they've never been part of the community. And that seems to be where some of the problem is. I don't see that happen at all here in Twin Falls.
Okay. What do you think is the biggest issue facing the Magic Valley, and what will you do as governor to try and address that issue?
Well, when you talk about the Magic Valley, there's certain areas on the periphery that have some issues. Obviously, Burley, Twin Falls, Jerome, what they need is skilled workers, because the expansion that's taken place there all requires more skills, and also requires craftsmen, contractors, sheetrockers, the plumbers. So the labor pipeline is one problem in the areas that are being pretty successful. The outside areas, they need more job opportunities.
Why do you want to be governor of Idaho, and why should we vote for you?
Well, Liyah, I look at everything through literally one lens, and that's how do we make it to where our kids and our grandkids can stay here, and those that have left to come back. I think everything in government policy, whether it be tax policy, regulations, healthcare, education, public safety, that is a great lens to look at everything through and say, this decision, because the governor has to make, and I've been pretty close to this thing, they need to make 10, 15 decisions a day, appointments, budgetary issues, legislative issues, and if you look at every decision through that lens, I believe that Idaho will continue to be a great place to live, work, and raise a family, and that's the lens. We're blessed that our kids left and came back to Idaho, and I want all my friends and neighbors and Idahoans to have the same opportunity we did, to where their kids will either elect to stay, or those that have left can come back.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time and for answering
You're welcome.
my questions.
Thank you
and
for the questions.
My clients' questions, and I wish you luck in your campaign.
All right, we're going to go get them. So.